When James and Millicent Smith stepped on to a very small sailing boat in 1842 in Boston Harbor, they were crossing a threshold. They were stepping over a threshold into a new way of life in which everything would change for them, and there would be no going back. They were leaving a very comfortable life in New England, Connecticut, New York, to come to Koloa. And about 5 months later, after being on that very small sailing boat, 96 feet long, they arrived in Honolulu, and then shortly after that, took another boat to Koloa Landing, right down the street here. They left behind their family, knowing that they would probably never see any of their family again. They sold or gave away almost all of their possessions. Just a few things that they could carry with them on the boat. And they arrived here by the end of 1842 and lived right across the street from here, not very far where the Smith Memorial Parsonage is, where I happen to live right now, named after James and Millicent Smith and their family. When they got here, James Smith was the only Western-trained medical doctor for all of Kauai and all of Niihau. There were some, I think they said 3,000 or so people, all pretty much native Hawaiian, right here in Koloa. And he was not only responsible for the people and their health here in Koloa, but all over this island and all over Niihau. Now, in those days, there were no roads. Imagine having to go up to Waimea to treat somebody. Even further, Hanalei. Even further, Niihau. It was arduous getting around, and he typically rode on horseback or walked everywhere he went. Unless, of course, he had to go to Niihau. And I hear that today, that's a rough trip to do. Back in the days of the 1840s and 50s and 60s, it was life-threatening. There were many times people wondered if they were going to make it to Niihau and back. It was hard getting around. James and Millicent Smith were here because they had heard that many of the Hawaiian people had died. Now, there's a few misconceptions about the early missionaries that I would just like to clear up right away for you, if that's okay. One of those misconceptions, something that I've heard over and over and over and even read about, is this idea that the missionaries came here when the Hawaiian people already had a perfectly good religion, and they told them that their religion was bad and that they had to convert to Christianity. So that's the way I always thought it was, growing up hearing those stories. But then I started reading history books, and do you know that when the missionaries came in 1820, the Hawaiian religion had already been abolished by Kamehameha II and Ka'ahumanu, the Kuhinanui, who was basically the co-regent of the islands. It was the Hawaiian chiefs that said, before the missionaries came, no more religion. They destroyed all the temples. They forbid people practicing the old religion, and there were severe consequences if you tried to rebuild the temple or practice your religion. Now, there were places in all the islands where people kept practicing their religion, but it was their chiefs that told them, or forbade them to ever do that again. Anything that had to do with the old religion. So when the missionaries arrived in 1820, there were all these Hawaiian people throughout all the islands. They weren't allowed to practice their old religion. They were spiritually hungry, and when the missionaries told them about Jesus and about God's love, within 20 to 30 years, most Hawaiians had converted to Christianity. 30 to 40 years, almost everyone had converted to some form of Christianity, even the ones that retained some of their old religious practices that they still did in secret in faraway places, not like downtown Honolulu, or probably not even in the middle of Koloa. So that's one of the fallacies that I was glad to hear just wasn't true. The missionaries didn't come and ruin the religion or tell people they couldn't participate anymore. The missionaries came when the people already had given up their religion because they were forced to by the chiefs. The other thing that I've often heard that simply isn't true is the missionaries came with all these diseases and spread diseases amongst all the people and killed more people than they ever saved, and they really only cared about their souls anyway. In 1778, when Captain James Cook arrived, he introduced diseases from faraway places, and the people of Hawaii had no immunities to any of the diseases. And over 40 years later, the missionaries showed up, in part because so many people had already died. And they didn't just send preachers, they sent medical doctors like James Smith of Koloa. When he got here, he took notes like crazy. He wrote things down, and he had a mission report he had to turn in every year. And he would write things down like, by the end of February, after he'd been here for a few years, we've had 11 deaths in the district, I think meaning just Koloa, and only one birth. And that wasn't the worst year. He basically kept writing down in his journals and in his mission reports about how many Hawaiian people were already dying, and his passion was to save people. In 1848, there was a horrible measles epidemic that swept across all of the islands of Hawaii, and about a fourth of the total population died that year. In 1853, there was a smallpox epidemic. And James Smith heard about smallpox arriving on Oahu. And he knew that the only way that they were ever going to save the Hawaiian race was to vaccinate the people. So he had already shipped over the smallpox vaccine for every person on Hawaii and Niihau. And when he heard that smallpox had arrived on Oahu, and he predicted there would be a death where thousands of people would die, he got on his horse. After he vaccinated everybody in Koloa, he got on his horse and headed around the entire island, going to every village, doing his best to vaccinate every single person. And he got on a boat and went to Niihau and did the same thing. By the end of that epidemic, some 6,000 people had died from smallpox on Oahu alone, and hundreds, if not thousands of others throughout all the rest of the Hawaiian Islands. One person died from smallpox from that epidemic on Hawaii, due to the compassion and hard work of Dr. James Smith. What blew me away reading about that again this week was not just the fact that he cared so much about the health of the Hawaiian people, he virtually risked his own life to save them all. When it came time to writing the mission report, he never once mentioned his actions. He never once talked about how he got on that horse and went around the whole island nonstop vaccinating people. He never mentioned hopping on a boat and going to Niihau. He simply praised God for God's providence and compassion. As I have read stories this week about Dr. Smith and the Smith family, I've been overwhelmed with not just the fact that he and his wife Millicent stepped over this threshold, but in the way in which they did so, who they were being, how they saw God, how they saw themselves and their relationship to the Hawaiian people. Now, I know there were some missionaries that were fairly arrogant. I know that there were some missionaries that may not have had the best motives. I know that missionaries and even pastors that sometimes don't see clearly and make mistakes. But it was so nice to read this week about Dr. James Smith, who just had a passion for the whole being of each person in the Hawaiian Islands. Not just caring about their souls, but caring about their whole being. As I was reading this morning's Old Testament lesson, I remember thinking, oh, it's the Ten Commandments. I'm going to talk about the Ten Commandments again, all the rules. But that's what the reading was for today. And so as I opened up to Exodus chapter 20, I was so glad that God didn't start out with the rules. God's first words are, I am. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and who carried you from that place of slavery. God starts out the conversation with people not with all the rules. He starts out the conversation about who we are. What is our identity? How do we relate to one another? And then, since the Hebrew people, had stepped over their own threshold and left the land of Egypt to never go back there and start this brand new way of life that was uncertain in every way possible, there were the Ten Commandments that were all about how people would relate to God and how people would relate to one another. I happened to grow up thinking about the Ten Commandments as just rules. That's not how they're presented in Exodus at all. Like I said, it starts out very ontological. Ontology, the study of being. This is who God is. This is God's identity. This is who we are as God's people. This is our identity. When you step over a threshold in your life, and we all have thresholds that we step over, sometimes it's exciting. Sometimes for me, when I moved to Kauai, I get to move to Kauai. I've been wanting to move back to Hawaii for so long, and I get to move to Koloa of all places. It was an exciting time in my life. I've talked to many people since I've been here that have recently, and while I've been here, stepped over thresholds that were not as exciting. In fact, some people have said, I have cancer. It's bad. It's changing everything about me. All of a sudden, other people have lost loved ones, spouses, children. There are thresholds that we step over that we would never want anybody to step over, and yet we found ourselves in those positions. We also sometimes step over thresholds and find ourselves in brand new places. James and Millicent Smith, Connecticut and New England, all the way to Koloa. But there's also these thresholds that we step over that change everything about us, and we're still in the same place. So a threshold can be very literal, like stepping onto a boat and leaving a coast and 5 months later going somewhere else. It can also be very metaphorical. You can be in the exact same place, but your life has changed. Almost everything about you seems to have changed. Jesus, in this morning's passage, talked about thresholds and the Ten Commandments. And in the days of Moses, when the commandments were given, I believe that people understood them as very relational and ontological. But over time, people got kind of literal and only saw the Ten Commandments literally, and saw them in particular as a bunch of rules to follow, and that was it. And then 1,400 years or so later, Jesus comes along and never says anything bad about the Ten Commandments, wants people to keep them, but says if you just focus on the rules, you miss the whole point. And he gets to the heart of the matter and actually says it's about what's in your heart. It's what's inside. Sure, the Ten Commandments say don't murder. But if you hate someone in your heart, you're already going in that direction. Start in here. Look inside. Ask who you are being. And then, of course, Jesus over and over talked about love and compassion. And our passage from Galatians today, the letter of Galatians that we read, talked about all the laws, all the rules, all the commandments can be summed up in one simple statement: love your neighbor as yourself. Period. That's all I'm here. As I was reading the book by John O'Donoghue, To Bless the Space Between Us, about thresholds this week, there was some really good advice that John O'Donoghue gives the readers. And I'd like to take just a moment to share some of those with you as you think about what's in here and the thresholds in your life that you've either recently crossed over or maybe about to cross over. Maybe you're actually in the midst of crossing over a threshold right now. Listen to these words. I'm going to read them slowly and reflectively. And I would invite you just to take a moment and ponder these words. It takes only a couple of seconds for a life to change irreversibly. Suddenly you stand on completely strange ground, and a new course of life has to be embraced. Especially at such times, we desperately need blessing and protection. Everything that was once so steady, so reliable, must now find a new way of unfolding. No threshold need be a threat, but rather an invitation and a promise. And now in closing, I would like to read one of the blessings that's actually in this book. It's called At the Threshold of Manhood, and I just want you to know that these words apply to men and women as well. This is a blessing from John O'Donoghue to all of his readers, and this is a blessing that I now give to all of you. May you discover gradually a natural confidence in your body. May your new strength be graceful as you learn to carry yourself with a dignity that is sure, bringing your gestures and expression into an easy harmony and rhythm. May you never feel the need to be coarse or force yourself. May you awaken confidently to the feminine within you and learn to integrate the beauty of intuition and feeling so that your sensitivity kindles and your heart is trusted. That you may slowly grow to trust the silence of the masculine as the home of your stillness. Be gentle with yourself. Love the life of your mind, furnishing it ever with new thoughts, so that your countenance glows with the joy of being alive. Be vigilant and true to an inner honor. Always have the courage to change, welcoming those voices that call you beyond yourself, beyond your work and action. Remain faithful to your heart. Amen.